St. Michael's Golden Domed Monastery Ukrainian, Mikhailivsky Zolotoverky Monastery is a functioning monastery in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. The monastery is located on the right bank of the Dnieper River on the edge of a bluff northeast of the St. Sophia Cathedral. The site is located in the historic administrative upper town and overlooks the city's historical commercial and merchant quarter, the Podil neighborhood. Originally built in the Middle Ages by Sviatopolk II Iziaslavich, the monastery comprises the cathedral itself, the refectory of St. John the Divine, built in 1713, the economic gates, constructed in 1760 and the monastery's bell tower, which was added circa 1716 to 1719. The exterior of the structure was rebuilt in the Ukrainian Baroque style in the 18th century while the interior remained in its original Byzantine style. The original cathedral was demolished by the Soviet authorities in the 1930s, but was reconstructed and opened in 1999 following Ukrainian independence in 1991. History: 11th to 19th centuries. Some scholars do not believe that Prince Iziaslav Yaroslavich, whose Christian name was Demetrius, first built the St. Demetrius's monastery and church in the upper town of Kiev near St. Sophia Cathedral in the 1050s. Half a century later, his son, Sviatopolk II Iziaslavich, is recorded as commissioning a monastery church 1108 to 1113 dedicated to his own patron saint, Michael the Archangel. One reason for building the church may have been Sviatopolk's recent victory over the nomadic Polyptysians, as Michael the Archangel was considered a patron of warriors and victories. In 1906, a medieval hoard of silver and gold jewelry was discovered in a metal casket on Treks-Vyatitelska Street of the Three Saints, opposite the gates of St. Michael's Golden Domed Monastery. Gold jewelry from the hoard is now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, while the silver jewelry and 2 ingots are in the British Museum, London. The hoard is dated to the 11th-12th centuries and was probably hidden at the time of the Tatar invasions and the sack of Kiev in 1240. The monastery was regarded as a family cloister of Sviatopolk's family. It was there that members of Sviatopolk's family were buried. This is in contrast to the Vidaichi monastery patronized by his rival, Vladimir Monomakh. The cathedral domes were probably the first in Kievan Rus to be gilded, a practice that became regular with the passage of time and acquired for the monastery the nickname of golden domed or golden roofed, depending on the translation. During the Mongol invasion in 1240, the monastery is believed to have been damaged seriously. The Mongols damaged the cathedral and removed its gold-plated domes. The cloister subsequently fell into disrepair and there is no documentation of it for the following 2.5 centuries. By 1496, the monastery had been revived and its name was changed from St. Demetrius Monastery to St. Michael's after the cathedral church built by Sviatopolk II NB1 after numerous restorations and enlargements during the 16th century. It gradually became one of the most popular and wealthiest monasteries in Ukraine. In 1620, Iov Beretsky made it the residence of the renewed Orthodox Metropolitan of Kiev, and in 1633, Isaiah Kopensky was named as supervisor of the monastery. NB2. The monastery enjoyed the patronage of hetmans and other benefactors throughout the years. The chief magnet for pilgrims were the relics of St. Barbara, alleged to have been brought to Kiev from Constantinople in 1108 by Sviatopolk II Iziaslavich's wife and kept in a silver reliquary donated by Hetman Ivan Mazyepa. NB3 Although most of the monastery grounds were secularized in the late 18th century, as many as 240 monks resided there in the 19th and 20th centuries. The monastery served as the residence of the Bishop of Chernigov after 1800. A precentor school was located on the monastery grounds. Many prominent composers, such as Kirill Ostetsenko and Yakov Yatsenevich, either studied or taught at the school. In 1870, about 100,000 pilgrims paid tribute to St. Barbara at St. Michael's Monastery. Before the Russian Revolution in 1917, rings manufactured and blessed at St. Michael's Monastery, known as St. Barbara's rings, were very popular among the citizens of Kiev. They usually served as good luck charms and, according to popular beliefs, occasionally protected against witchcraft but were also effective against serious illnesses and sudden death. These beliefs reference the facts that the monastery was not affected by the plague epidemics in 1710 and 1770 and cholera epidemics of the 19th century. Demolition of the cathedral and bell tower. During the first half of the 1930s, various Soviet publications questioned the known historical facts regarding the age of the cathedral. The publications stressed that the medieval building had undergone major reconstructions and that little of the original Byzantine-style cathedral was preserved. This wave of questioning led to the demolition of the monastery and its replacement with a new administrative center for the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic previously located in the city of Kharkiv. Before its demolition June 8 to July 9, 1934, the structure was carefully studied by T.M. Movchanovsky and K. Honkarev from the recently purged and reorganized Institute of Material Culture of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. On the basis of their survey, the cathedral was declared to belong primarily to the Ukrainian Baroque style, rather than to the 12th century as was previously thought, and thus did not merit preservation due to its lack of historical and artistic value. This conclusion backed up the Soviet authorities' plans to demolish the entire monastery. Local historians, archaeologists, and architects agreed to the monastery's demolition, although reluctantly. Only one professor, Mykola Makarenko, refused to sign the Demolition Act. He later died in a Soviet prison. Before. In the mid-1930s, after the transfer of the Ukrainian capital from Kharkiv to Kiev, a decision was made to demolish the cathedral and build administrative buildings in its place. For this purpose, in 1934 Soviet authorities have decided to hold a competition for the project of the governmental center with a place for parades. In all of the projects submitted for the location in the area of Bogdan Khmelnytsky Square, the St. Michael's Golden Domed Cathedral was demolished, except for one. The project of Joseph Karakas was the only one of 4 projects submitted for the competition with the location of the center in this place, in which the St. Michael's Golden Domed Cathedral and the monument to Bogdan Khmelnytsky were preserved. However, at the end of the first round, the project of architect Peter Yurchenko was selected by the authorities as the most appropriate. This project, according to architect Byarofalov, was repeating the general scheme of the Karakas, but was done in a more frontal approach, with the liquidation of the St. Michael's Golden Domed Cathedral. And if the location of the main volumes of the Karakas is asymmetric, in March 1934, authorities decided to abandon the previous decision and announce a new competition, and at the end to choose the project of architect Joseph Langbar. Meanwhile, according to Oleg Unikov's research based on archive documents, it is clear that although there is no cathedral in the projects of J. Langbar and P. Yurchenko, that was not the reason for the demolition, since the decision to demolish the monastery was adopted by the resolution of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Communist Party in February 1934, and the dismantling of mosaics began to be produced already in 1933. On June 26, 1934, work began on the removal of the 12th century Byzantine mosaics. It was conducted by the mosaic section of the Leningrad Academy of Fine Arts. Specialists were forced to work in haste on account of the impending demolition and were thus unable to complete the entire project. Despite the care and attention shown during the removal of the mosaics from the cathedral's walls, the relocated mosaics cannot be relied upon as being absolutely authentic. The remaining mosaics, covering an area of 45 square meters (485 square feet), were apportioned among the State Hermitage Museum, the Tretiakov Gallery, and the State Russian Museum. The other remaining mosaics were installed on the second floor of the St. Sophia Cathedral, where they were not on display for tourists. Those items that remained in Kiev were seized by the Nazis during World War II and taken to Germany. After the war ended, they fell into American hands and were later returned to Moscow. During the spring of 1935, the golden domes of the monastery were pulled down. The cathedral's silver royal gates, Mazeppa's reliquary weighing 2 pounds of silver and other valuables, were sold abroad or simply destroyed. Master Hrihorye's 5-tier iconostasis was removed and later destroyed from the cathedral as well. St. Barbara's relics were transferred to the Church of the Tithes and, upon that church's demolition, to the St. Volodymyr's Cathedral in 1961. During the spring-summer period of 1936, the shell of the cathedral and bell tower were blown up with dynamite. The monastery's economic gate Ikonomshna Brahma and the monastic walls were also destroyed. After the demolition, a thorough search for valuables was carried out by the NKVD on the site. The resulting empty plot was joined with Sofievska Square, renamed Uriadova Square Governmental Square, and was designated as the new city center and parade grounds. Soviet authorities then commissioned a competition how to best fill the empty plot. Most architects, including Yakov Steinberg, suggested a huge Lenin statue. The square itself was planned as a rectangle with huge governmental buildings on the perimeter. 4 pillars were planned with statues of workers, peasants and revolutionaries with flags standing on them. Some architects suggested to demolish the statue of Bogdan Khmelnytsky in front of the St. Sophia Cathedral and the cathedral itself. The only building completed on the former monastery grounds before World War II currently houses the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The construction of the second building, the Capitol Center, planned to be built on the site where the cathedral had once stood, was delayed in the spring of 1938 as the authorities were not satisfied with the submitted design. This building failed to materialize. Sometime after demolition, the site where the former cathedral used to be located was transformed into a sport complex, including tennis and volleyball courts. The refectory trapeze of St. John the Divine was used for changing rooms. Preservation and reconstruction. In August 1963, the preserved refectory of the demolished monastery without its Baroque cupola was designated a Monument of Architecture of the Ukrainian SSR. In 1973, the Kiev City Council established several archaeological preservation zones within the city. These included the territory surrounding the monastery. However, the vacant site of the demolished cathedral was excluded from the proposed Historic Archaeological Park Museum, the Ancient Kiev, developed by architect A.M. Maletsky and consultants M.V. Kolostenko and P.P. Tolochko. During the 1970s, Ukrainian architects I. Melnik, A. Zayika, V. Korol, and engineer A. Kolyakov worked out a plan of reconstruction of the St. Michael's Monastery. However, these plans were only considered after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. In 1973 to 1982, restoration of the refectory church of St. John the Theologian, the only building that survived the demolition of the 1930s, was held. Authors of the project, architect V. Shevchenko and architect Ikarakis Interiors and Furniture. After Ukraine regained independence in 1991, the demolition of the monastery was deemed a crime and voices started to be heard calling for the monastery's full-scale reconstruction as an important part of the cultural heritage of the Ukrainian people. These plans were approved and carried out in 1997 to 1998, whereupon the cathedral and bell tower were transferred to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Kiev Patriarchate. Yuri Ivakin, the chief archaeologist for the site, said that more than 260 valuable ancient artifacts were recovered during excavations of the site before reconstruction. In addition, a portion of the ancient cathedral, still intact, was uncovered. This today makes up a part of the current cathedral's crypt. With support of the Kiev city authorities, architect-restorer Y. Luzitsky and others restored the western part of the stone walls. The bell tower was restored next and became an observation platform. Instead of the original chiming clock, a new electronic one with hands and a set of chimes, a total of 40, was installed, from which today the melodies of famous Ukrainian composers can be heard. NB5 The cathedral was reconstructed last and decorated with a set of wooden Baroque icons, copies of former mosaics and frescoes, and new works of art by Ukrainian artists. The newly rebuilt St. Michael's Golden Domed Cathedral was officially opened on May 30, 1999. However, interior decorations, mosaics, and frescoes were not completed until May 28, 2000. The side chapels were consecrated to SS. Barbara and Catherine in 2001. During the following 4 years, 18 out of 29 mosaics and other objets d'art from the original cathedral were returned from Moscow after years of tedious discussion between Ukrainian and Russian authorities. However, by the end of 2006, the remaining frescoes of the monastery are going to be transferred from the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg to Kiev. They are placed in a special preserve that is owned by the municipality rather than the church body. Historic pictures. Featured landmarks. St. Michael Golden Domed Cathedral. The religious architecture of St. Michael's Golden Domed Monastery incorporates elements that have evolved from styles prevalent during Byzantine and Baroque periods. The St. Michael's Golden Domed Cathedral Ukrainian see as the monastery's main church, built in 1108 to 1113 at the behest of Svyatopolk II Iziaslavich. The cathedral was the largest of 3 churches of St. Demetrius Monastery. The ancient cathedral was modeled on the Assumption Cathedral of the Kiev Monastery of the Caves. It used the Greek cross plan prevalent during the time of the Kievan Rus, 6 pillars, and 3 apses. A miniature church, likely a baptistry, adjoined the cathedral from the south. There was also a tower with a staircase leading to the choir loft. It was incorporated into the northern part of the narthex rather than protruding from the main block as was common at the time. It is likely that the cathedral had a single dome, although 2 smaller domes might have topped the tower and baptistry. The interior decoration was lavish as its high-quality shimmering mosaics, probably the finest in Kievan Rus, still testify. When the medieval churches of Kiev were rebuilt in the late 17th and early 18th centuries in the Ukrainian Baroque style, the cathedral was enlarged and renovated dramatically. By 1746, it had acquired a new Baroque exterior, while maintaining its original Byzantine interior. 6 domes were added to the original single dome, but the added pressure on the walls was counteracted by the construction of buttresses. The remaining medieval walls, characterized by alternative layers of limestone and flat brick, were covered with stucco. Ivan Hryhorovich Barsky was responsible for window surrounds and stucco ornamentation. Inside the church, An intricate 5-tier icon screen funded by Hetman Pavlo Skoropadsky and executed by Hryhorij Petrov from Chernigov was installed in 1718. During the 18th and 19th centuries, almost all of the original Byzantine mosaics and frescoes on the interior walls were painted over. Some restoration work on the mosaics and frescoes that remained unpainted was carried out towards the end of the 19th century. However, there were no major and serious investigations of the walls done, so it is possible that medieval frescoes or mosaics were preserved under the newer coats of plaster. Refectory of St. John the Divine. The refectory of the monastery is a rectangular brick building which contains a dining hall for the brethren as well as several kitchens and pantries. The Church of John the Theologian adjoins it from the east. The outside is segmented by pilasters and displays window surrounds reminiscent of traditional Eastern Orthodox church architecture. The refectory was erected in 1713, taking the place of the original wooden refectory. Its interior was overhauled in 1827 and 1837 and the restoration work was undertaken from 1976 to 1981.